I'll
Okay,
give you the mic.
yeah. And Kaylin's going to run the slide, so there might be a bit of me saying next or something like that while I'm talking, but I hope that doesn't bother too many people. So just a quick outline. Claire covered a lot of the basics about a Sappy hour. Our presentation today, we're going to cover tips and tricks of data entry. We're not going to cover entering point counts because we actually covered that very thoroughly with its very own Sappy hour. I guess that was back in May now, but you can have a look for that on our YouTube channel, and we'll post some links at the end as well. Maybe can somebody drop that in the chat maybe real quick, the link to our YouTube channel. We'll post that again later in the presentation as well. So we're going to talk about the data entry deadline, and then we actually last minute decided to change up our order slightly so it no longer matches their outline. We're going to skip ahead to add the app data entry first, and then we'll cover web data entry and eBird import. And then we've got a few frequently asked questions, things we get asked a lot. We're going to cover a few of those, and then we're going to turn things over to you. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A like Claire said, or you can wait until the end to ask. And they don't have to necessarily be related directly to data entry. They can be anything related to the Atlas. And then we've got a few announcements we'll make right at the end as well. Okay, next slide. So the first up is our data entry. So our little cartoon here, the red starts reminding you, don't forget data entry deadline is August 31st. And you may be in the boat of the parasitic Jaeger there, saying, of course, I already entered all my peak season data. Get off my case, Mike and Kaylin. But it really is extra important this year. That's why that red starts bugging you about it. It's extra important this year. We only have one more year left to collect data in 2025. So we really need all the data we have into the system as early as possible because we want to get going on all the planning we need to do over the next couple months to make sure we take full advantage of our last year and don't miss out on any opportunities. All right, next slide. And Kaylin, how's my sound? My fan is on, but
I can hear you. I can hear you.
okay, I fixed a setting in Zoom that seems to have done it, so
Okay,
that's great.
nice. Yeah, we can hear you clearly.
Excellent. So just as a refresher, or if you're completely new to the Atlas, what do you need to have for an Atlas checklist? You need to have the date and the time you started birding, when you started out atlasing on that date. Unless it's an incidental checklist, then you need to have the duration of how much time you spent out in that particular birding event. And you need to have a discrete location. So we can accept checklist level data or square level data, but we really can't use it for a whole lot of our analyses. So we really want to encourage everybody to be as specific as possible with their location. So whether that's sitting out in your backyard or making a stop along a road somewhere or hiking a trail, we need to know the location. And I've got in there in bold, in all caps, stay within the single Atlas square. It's super important. If you cross square boundaries, then we can't use the data at all for the Atlas. That's the way we divide things up. If you're doing a traveling checklist, then you'll also need to have the distance that you traveled. And you don't need to be, ultra precise, as long as you're within the right ballpark, within, you were out for between a kilometer or 2 kilometers, and you can tell us you were out for about 1.5 kilometers. That's good. And then you'll need to enter any details about significant species, whether they're rare or colonial species that get flagged, and you're being asked for more details. So these are the universal requirements that we need on Atlas checklists. And we'll be talking a lot about these as we go through the specifics of how to enter that data, whether it's using the app or the website. All right, I think I'm going to turn things over to Kayla now.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, we're definitely going to be talking about those checklist requirements kind of throughout this presentation. And so I'm going to start us off by talking about the Nature Counts app. So the app is available on the Apple App Store, so that's that top logo, and then the Google Play Store. So if you have an iPhone or Android device, the Nature Counts app will be available to you. Oops. Yeah, okay, great. So at this point in the season, chances are you may be looking to input some historical data. So there are some differences in entering your data live versus entering historical data. And by historical data, I mean anything from 2021 to 2024, anything within the data collection period of the atlas. So we're not looking for data prior to 2021, just within that collection period. So for live data entry using the Nature Counts app, the app will automatically fill in the current date, time, and location. And so as soon as you open the app, it'll know the date and time as well as where you are in that moment. It'll usually prompt you when you first download the app to allow it to enable your location sharing with the app. And so if you turn that off, it won't know where you are, but as long as you enable it, it will know your current location. The Nature Counts app can also record your track and the distance that you've traveled within your checklist, again, if you enable that feature. Like I said, at this point in the season, you may be looking to enter some historical data, and that is also possible within the app. If you click on the date, start time, or edit location, you can change any of those fields. So you can turn the clock back to, this morning, yesterday morning, the morning of June in 2021. And if you press edit location, you can select where you did that atlasing at that time. So the app isn't just useful for entering the live data, but can be used in that historical context as well. So once you've selected your date, time, and location, you also want to select your protocol. So as Mike said, we're not covering point counts here. I'm actually just going to be talking about general atlasing because that's most of the data that we do collect is through general atlasing. So in order to add a species, you want to click in the BE column. BE stands for breeding evidence. And you can add breeding evidence by clicking in that column. And then you can add individuals by clicking in the total column. So those are the two columns that the three columns we have here are the species, the breeding evidence, and the total number of individuals. So you can either scroll through the entire list or you can use the search bar. Just in the interest of time, I don't show entering things in the search bar because we have a few videos on that. But we're going to go over kind of the basics of adding these individuals. So you can add your breeding evidence by clicking the BE column. You can move over to the list view if you don't know what kind of those individual letters mean. So P for pair, et cetera, et cetera. You can swap between grid view and list view. So I'll click in the BE column. It'll come up as grid view. You can switch to list view to see what all of those breeding evidence codes mean. And then you can click on a breeding evidence code to select it. If you select a breeding evidence code that's unusual for a species, it'll give you a warning and say that that breeding evidence code is not typical for that species. So in this case, I've selected singing for Canada goose, and it's giving me a warning that geese don't typically sing for breeding evidence, and that H would be preferable in this situation. So you do get those warnings, and you can learn a lot about breeding evidence of individual species this way. The Nature Counts app has also incorporated the safe dates into the app, which we find quite handy. In the past, we do have safe dates charts that you can look up the safe dates of each of the species. But now you can see the safe dates as soon as you click on the BE column for any of those species. So here for American robin, it's showing, I mean, it's after August 17th, but when I took this screenshot, we were still within the safe dates, and so it's showing up as green. It says you are within the breeding season for this species. If you're not within the breeding season for a certain species, then it will give you a caution or even a warning. So it will be yellow or red. And those are to indicate that you are not within the safe dates for that species or within the breeding season, and that there may be migrants present at that time. There is a little option there to learn more, that kind of information button, and you can click on it to learn more about the safe dates for any species that's on there. Another really great way to learn a little bit more about our breeding birds. So when you, I think it didn't add the count. Oops. I was supposed to have a little video on here about adding a count. So if you click in the total column, it adds individuals of a certain species. And I have a video coming up next about editing that count. But I do want to mention, not to forget, adding details and pins for significant species. We also have individual videos about significant species and about pinning species locations. So I don't actually show that in here because I want to give Mike enough time to show the web portal. However, if you click on a species name, like this blue-winged teal here, you can see there's an option there to add details or to add a location. So that would be like the pinned species location. We want details and pin locations of significant species. So those could be species that are provincially rare, regionally rare, or species of interest. So those are the ones that are flagged with the flags that I've shown here. So to edit breeding evidence is the same as adding it in the first place when there's no breeding evidence already there. So you click in the BE column, the breeding evidence comes up, and you can either press the trash bin if you want to get rid of it entirely, or you can just select a new breeding evidence code. So from in this video, I'm kind of just switching between habitat H and nest with eggs and E. So you can click on it and change it as many times as you like, or like I said, you can press the trash bin to completely erase the breeding evidence. If you press and hold in the total column, a little keyboard will come up, a number pad will come up in order for you to add large numbers of individuals. So instead of pressing the plus sign 10 times to add 10 individuals, you could press and hold in that plus column. In the total column and add 10 individuals, or you can just erase the number entirely like I'm doing in this video. So here I'm just switching between adding 2 individuals and erasing that number altogether. I should mention here that erasing that number is not going to remove it from your list. So just erasing it, you'd think that there would be no individuals and it wouldn't show up. But we do have some breeding evidence codes that don't require a number of individuals. So something like a used nest, you might not necessarily see, the bird species there. So you don't necessarily have to have a number in the total column. So what do you do to completely erase a species from your list? You press and hold on the species name. So here I'm pressing and holding on Canada goose, and it's asking me if I want to remove the species from my list, and I'm saying yes. So I'll press and hold, and that's where I clear it. Once you're done your list and you've gotten to the point where you're reviewing the checklist, you have an opportunity to review your tracks or to edit your tracks. So say I went out and I did my checklist and I put my phone in my pocket and I drove all the way home. I crossed 10 square boundaries to get there. What do? Well, I could edit my track. So here I'm adjusting the accuracy of the track. So sometimes, your cell will ping off different towers and you get kind of jumpy tracks. That's where you can adjust the accuracy. And then you can trim the track either at the front or at the end of it. So if you were to, drive all the way home, you can completely cut that out. Okay, if the app is not working as you expected it to be, just make sure that the app is up to date. Our current version is 6.0.1. You can find that in the settings of your app. So you can see kind of at the bottom right of that screen, it's under settings. You could see the version number and as well as kind of your the phone or device that you're using at that time. And if it's still not working as you expected, then on that same page is an option to give feedback. So that'll take you to the Nature Counts feedback page. And please leave a review for Nature Counts on your App Store. So either the Apple App Store or Google Play Store. They've put a lot of time and effort into improving the app, since 2021. And I think that it's a really, really great version of it. I'm loving using it. We've been using it without issues for the past couple seasons. And I would really appreciate if you guys could leave them a review and let them know what you think about it. And with that, I will go ahead and hand it over to Mike. I'm going to stop sharing so we can share.
All right, awesome. Thanks. I just wanted to quick say one thing. Kaylin is an iPhone user, so things look a very, very slight bit different, possibly if you're using an Android. And the current version for Android users is 6.0.0. The 6.0.1 hasn't come out yet for regular Android users, so don't panic if you're only using 6.00 and you're an Android user. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. And we're gonna walk through some of the same stuff that Kaylin just covered with the app. I'm gonna cover how to do those things using the website data entry. So you're gonna see me looking off to the side because I've got this screen on another screen. So we've logged in to Nature Counts through the Atlas website. I'm gonna go to submit data. And just like on the app, the first step is we need to tell Nature Counts where exactly we were. And unlike the app, the website doesn't have the benefit of the GPS in your pocket telling you where it is, so you need to know. You can use your mouse on the map screen. I have one of those mouses that has a wheel in the middle between the two buttons. So I love that because I can just use the wheel to zoom in. If you don't have that, there's little plus minus buttons in the bottom right. And if you did happen to know the square number, you can click the find square. But we'll, for the example we're gonna do, I'm just gonna zoom in. For those of you who know me, I'm in the Peterborough area, and I'm gonna enter a list from just outside of the Trent University area. There's a Trent nature area over here. I'm gonna switch to the satellite view. And you can select a single location, that's dropping a point, and you can give it a name. If you did a traveling count and you know your route, you can actually draw your route. So I'm gonna draw the route that I did. Roughly, I went up here, and then I went into this field area, and then back. So the nice thing is if you do your line with the traveling count, it will calculate your distance for you. So I went 0.6 kilometers. So I'm going to give it a name just for my own records. I'm going to keep the square number, and I'm going to say Trent Nature Sanctuary. And so we've said we're doing a traveling count. We've drawn the transect. We need to put in our date. You can use the little buttons here to go up. This is the day. Select the month from the list and the year, or you can select the calendar icon. So this checklist was from June 12th. I'm going back there, June 12th. You need your start time. So this was 8:30 a.m. And I was out for 65 minutes. And it was just me, one observer. And we were out for 0.6 kilometers. It already calculated that for me. And there's the question here about whether it's a complete checklist or not. Yes, it was. I'm reporting all the birds I was able to identify, and we're not doing point counts. So I'm going to click continue. That'll get us to our next screen. And then the second stage of entering data, of course, is telling Nature Counts what it is you actually saw. So you're going to be presented with a list, all the birds that are kind of expected in that Atlas region. If you wanted to search for a species instead of going all the way down, you can type in the species name. So let's do song sparrow. There it is. And so it brings that species up to the top of your list. You need to enter the count, how many individuals of that species, and the breeding evidence, the BE. So I had 2 song sparrows, and the breeding evidence I had was singing. So that's S. And so once you start typing in the code, it should pop up with the short form for it. All right, next we had Eastern Meadowlark, and I'm going to use the 4-letter code in this case, if you know it, a little faster, Eastern Meadowlark. And this one you can see has the little icon there, the double S that Kaylin mentioned because this is a species of interest. So we want to add some details. So this one I had 1, the breeding evidence code was S as well. I'm going to add details for that species. That pops up the add details box where I can write some comments. Singing, so in this case, I'm just putting some notes about what I saw. And ideally, you'd want to put a nice description of the bird, but I'm not going to bore you with writing that out right now. We also encourage you to add a pin. Kaylin mentioned pinned as well. Those are found under the coordinates tab. And so we want to zoom in where we were. There's our track. I can switch to satellite view. And so the meadowlark, no surprise to those of you who know meadowlarks well, was in this field area. So I'm going to click where it was. That will fill in the ID. That's pin number 1 for this species, the latitude, the longitude, and we had 1 individual, and the breeding evidence code was S, singing. Okay, and if I had another pin, I could say I had another one here, but of course I didn't. So I'm going to push the little trash icon to get rid of it. Okay, so I've got my coordinates, I've got my description. I'm going to close this extra box, and I've got one more species to add. That is American robin. And I had 4, and that one was nest with eggs, NE. All right, once you've got your species list in here, you would then click the submit button. And there we go. Thank you for submitting. It is going to show you your list again, and you might say, oh, shoot, I forgot to add something to that list. So you could then change the species list. That'll bring us back to the last page, and I can say, oh, I forgot mourning dove. There it is. And I had 1, and it was singing as well. I'm going to submit that again. All right, now you notice also this one says this checklist has automatically been shared with eBird. That's because I've set up in my profile the option for automatically sharing my nature counts list to my eBird account. Okay, speaking of eBird, how about getting data from eBird into the atlas? Lots of people like to collect their data using eBird and then import it in, although we're seeing fewer and fewer people doing that as they realize how great the app is. If we wanted to do that, we're going to start a new checklist. Now you can either do it from this page if you're doing it in succession, but if you're starting a fresh sort of data entry day, then you'd go into submit and click submit data again. That'll take us back to that same page we started at, but down here at the bottom, there's a little import from eBird option. So this tells us we need to enter the eBird checklist ID that we want to import. So I happen to have that already pulled up. Here's my eBird checklist, a real fancy checklist from this morning. I happen to be in Toronto. So I've got the checklist ID in the URL. It can also be found right here above the date. So you want those numbers. So you can select them with your mouse and then right click and select copy. Or if you're really good at memorizing numbers, you can just memorize the number. I'm going to head back over to my nature counts page. I'm going to now right click and click paste. There's our checklist ID. Let's import that from eBird. It's going to take a second. And there we go. So it's filled in all the stuff from eBird that it can. So the little green pin there is where it is using. That's the location I had used for eBird. So it's got the coordinates, it's got the date, it's got the time, it's got the duration, number of observers, distance traveled, that it was a complete checklist. And if you did point counts, you won't be able to do that with an eBird import anyways. So we want you to make sure you double check all that information is correct. Then click continue. You'll go on and you'll see your bird list. Now, what it's showing us is the entire list of possible birds for the Toronto region in the atlas. If we want to just see what we have data in here entered for, we can click the only show species with data checkbox. And it's going to show us the 3 species that we had data for, rock pigeon, ring-billed gull, and house sparrow, as well as the breeding evidence code that's been brought in from eBird. If you need to make some changes here, maybe you want to add a few more breeding evidence codes that you didn't put in eBird, or you want to add details, especially those pins, which obviously you can't do in eBird, please do. But once you're happy with how it looks, then you click submit. And there we go. It's in here in the Atlas. This is the Atlas checklist ID, and it's also linked to the eBird checklist ID as well. So that's a real quick primer on how to get data entered, either bringing it in from eBird or entering it directly through the website. I'm going to stop sharing, and we're going to head back to the slides.
Great. All right, just give me 1 second here. Okay, awesome. So as we alluded to earlier in the presentation, everything that you could possibly desire, well, maybe not everything, but all of our Atlas tutorials are on our YouTube channel, which I've put in the chat here. It's youtube.com/@onboardatlas. So all of our tutorials are on there, which include submitting checklist data through the app and web portal, importing eBird data, how to do marsh bird surveys, how to do digital point counts. The list goes on. So check it out for those tutorials. But also, if you're new to the Atlas, there are videos on getting started with the Atlas, what the different breeding evidence codes mean, what are significant species, and then past Sappy hours. So last year we did a Sappy hour on strictly on data entry using the Nature Counts app, which was more in depth than the one that I gave today. It included pinning species locations on the app, and so on. And then some of our fun Sappy hours, like summarizing and celebrating year 1, 2, and 3. So make sure you check it out if you ever have any questions. One really great thing about the YouTube channel and those YouTube videos is that you can pause them, you can rewind them. If you're trying to do your data entry at the same time, step by step, then, you can go at your own pace, which is really great. So make sure to check it out. So next we're going to do some frequently asked questions. So some issues that people run into and reach out to us about that we have seen some, common threads among some of our atlasers. So I'll let Mike get started with this one.
Yeah, sure. So one of the issues that we see happen pretty regularly is when people are collecting data in eBird and then they want to bring it into the Atlas. Of course, when you're using eBird for regular birding and not atlasing, then you don't know where the squares are necessarily, where the square boundaries are, and that's sort of a central pillar of how Atlas data are collected. So it's very important to stay within a single square for your Atlas checklist. So if you have a checklist like this, you will get an error. And so this error says the coordinates of your location or your track fall outside the Atlas square. And you can see the example. This is, a lot of you might recognize this. This is Rondo Provincial Park, which happens to be intersected by 4 different Atlas squares. So it's a place, if you're doing a lot of birding, you have to be really careful where you're doing your checklists if you want them to be used by the Atlas. In a case like this, there's really no way you can edit that properly. We would recommend you trying to split that up into the 3 different squares you might have visited, or maybe it's just not suitable for the Atlas, this one, and you'll know better for next time to keep your checklist limited to the single square. All right, and we're on to another eBird frequently asked question. So we get this question a lot: why won't my checklist get sent to eBird? So you saw in the example I gave, it automatically shot that Nature Counts checklist over to eBird. Same thing, if you've got that setting set up in your profile on Nature Counts and you're using the app, it'll do the same thing. But sometimes it doesn't work, and people can't figure out how to get it working the first time. And it's usually because you don't actually have your eBird credentials saved in your profile. So when you go into your profile, you get down to this section that says eBird exports, and there's a little spot for you to put your login name and your eBird password. The thing that people forget is they've got to click that save button that's right beside the password. If you don't click that, and you just scroll down to the end of the page. You'll save any other settings you did on your profile, but this part here is sort of a separate thing. So make sure you click that save button, and then it should start working for you. If it doesn't, then there's something else going on. Maybe you got your password wrong or something like that. You can always reach out to us at that point, but first make sure that there's actually something saved in the eBird export section of your profile. Okay, and what happens if you make a mistake? Whether you're entering it with the app or through the website, you can always go back and edit the checklist later. You have to do the edits through the website currently. At some point, maybe before the end of the atlas, we'll have that ability within the app, but that's not currently possible. So you need to find your data form by logging into the website. Under the My Data menu, there's a View Data Forms option, and this will list all your atlas checklists. You can find it in that list and then click the little edit button. That'll open up the checklist, and just like how I added that mourning dove to the example checklist I was showing, then you can change numbers, add species, or do whatever fixes you need to do. And the really nice thing is, if you make an error and you've got your eBird linked to your nature counts, it'll automatically send that change back to eBird. So very handy. You don't have to make the update in two different places. Just update it in nature counts and it should push it that correction over to eBird as well.
Great. Okay, I'm gonna take over for a few of the questions. So there's kind of a general question of why won't Nature Counts submit my checklist? There are some errors that Nature Counts gives that are more intuitive than others. Most of the errors surrounding not submitting the checklist are usually that there's some required information that's lacking. So remember from the start of our presentation when we talked about some of the required information. So that includes date, time, duration, location, the distance for traveling checklists, details for flagged species or records, and then as Mike just showed, the checklist might cross a square boundary. And so some of, the date or time or duration, there's usually some pretty intuitive warnings that just says, um, if this is a complete checklist, then you need to add a duration or, so on and so forth. But I'll talk about some of the errors that are maybe not so intuitive or maybe don't give as good of explanations to help you determine what to do in order for it to be submitted. Okay, so the first one is just this general warning sign, the triangle with the exclamation mark inside of it. This is something that comes up on the Nature Counts app, and that is just a general kind of species flag. So it usually means that it means that you require some details that are not currently there. So species might be flagged for details if they're regionally rare, provincially rare, or a species of interest. And so those are the flags that you'll see next to the species names if those are the case. Or if there's a high number of individuals that are observed, then it might get flagged for details for that as well. You'll see that triangle with the exclamation mark inside of it. If you try to press the submit button, it'll say that there is however many errors kind of at the top there. And the submit button will be grayed out. So if that's the case, then you'll need to click on the species name. You'll need to add some details, and then you can pin the species location as well. Another error that you might get when you try to submit your checklist this time on the web form is that the following species have inconsistent data between the main list and the details section. And so in this case, it says the mute swan error, 1 is smaller than 3. And so in this case, what this means is that I've pinned more mute swans than I have added in this kind of count column. So I've said I've seen 1 mute swan in the count column, but when I entered my pins, I have 3 mute swans there. So you've likely pinned more individuals than your count column. So you either need to delete some of the pins or increase the count column, whichever is the correct answer in your situation. All right, and that's kind of it for our frequently asked questions. Mike, do you want to do our announcements?
Sure. Yeah. So we mentioned it at the start, but I'm going to mention it again because it's so important. We have our data entry deadline coming up at the end of the month. So it's just a few more days for the data entry deadline, and it's extra important this year to get those data in, as I said, so we can really get to work on our planning. We're already doing what we can, but we really need to make sure we're not going to plan a whole bunch of stuff and then realize, oh, there was actually a whole bunch of work done in that area, so now we need to change. So please try your hardest to get your data in. We will absolutely accept data entered after August 31st, but the longer kind of you push it past August 31st, the harder it becomes for us to get our planning done properly. So please, as soon as possible, by the end of the month is preferable. Also, for the end of the month, we have the August challenge. So a few more days left for our August Atlas challenge. And this month's challenge is about submitting photos to the Atlas via our media submission page. Every time you enter a photo to us, you're entered into a draw for a pair of Vortex binoculars. We're looking for nice photos of adult birds. We're looking for photos of breeding evidence, especially any kind of breeding evidence, whether it's nests, feeding young, displaying birds, anything like that are really helpful. We're looking for great photos of bird habitats that show key features of habitats really well. And we're looking for photos of atlasers doing their thing out in the field. So I'm sure almost everybody out there has some great photos that they could share with us. We don't know who you are. So we need you to send us your photos so we can get them into the Atlas. We might use them for our social media, our website, our newsletters, but we're also really in the thick of preparing for Atlas publication. And so we're really starting to try to refine what photos are out there and decide which ones we might use in some of our final products. So it's a very exciting time here at the Atlas office. And we are excited for the chance for you to win binoculars. So get those photos in by the end of the month. And just because it's the end of the summer, school's coming back to school, doesn't mean that you have to stop atlasing. There's lots of birds out there still just doing breeding evidence. One of them in particular is the white-winged crossbill. Looks and sounds like they are setting up in sort of the northeastern boreal forest, kind of up around like Cochrane, maybe Timmins, Kapuskasing, Hearst kind of area, where they're setting up and they might be getting ready to start a breeding season. So if you're looking for a little adventure and you're from not that area, maybe plan a weekend trip and do some atlasing up that way. Kaylin, do you have any other announcements you want to make before we switch over to questions?
No, that's it. And that's all we've got for now. So yeah, definitely open to starting our question period.
All right, sounds good. Well, thank you, Mike and Kayla, for the presentation. Yeah, as you mentioned, we'll start the Q&A. So we have a question here that looks like came from the Zoom live or the Facebook Live recording. So this question here is, my point count special survey data that was recorded by audio and submitted for interpretation by experts for my 3 squares has not yet been entered from 2023. Should I try to interpret the audio myself from my own records that I kept if there is a backlog? And when can the data be entered if I'm outside the data entry dates?
Okay, good question. So this is, for those of you unfamiliar, you can do digital point counts, which are done using a handheld recording device. The Atlas has a bunch of those units for borrow through regional coordinators. And so if you're not somebody who's confident doing point counts in person, because they're really tough, you've got to be able to identify everything by sight and sound that you might encounter in a very short period of time. So you can do those digital point counts. That's what we're talking about. And so anybody who did point counts in 2023 is probably getting antsy. We are getting antsy as well to see those data get into the Atlas. We had a meeting with the folks that handle those digital data just last week, I think it was, Kaylin. So we're getting very close to having those brought into the atlas. So there's no need for you to do the interpretation yourself. In fact, we really want it to be done in a more standardized way using a particular system. So we don't want you to do that. We just ask for a little more patience. Hopefully in the next month or so, we'll get that data into the atlas and we'll get those summaries out to all the people who did submit those digital point counts from 2023 and send you your results so you can see what you recorded.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mike. So I'll give it a little bit, see if anybody has more questions. So again, if you're on Facebook Live, feel free to type your question as a comment on the Facebook live stream. If you're in Zoom, you can use the Q&A function there at the bottom of your screen to type in a question and we'll address that.
This isn't necessarily related to our talk today, but just about data entry. Do we want to talk a little bit about, for digital point counts, folks filling out the Zoom log? This is kind of a new thing this year, so maybe Mike, you can explain it.
Sure, yeah. So yeah, we've been talking, it is relevant to what we're talking about. I mean, we covered point counts in our last Sappy hour, as we said at the start, but so with the August 31st deadline to get the data in, it also is the deadline to get 2024 digital point counts submitted. And we added a new requirement for those digital point counts this year, which was the filling out of a log, basically, that said, here are the recordings that I made. This is what it represents, basically. And we needed that as an extra tool because we were basically figuring out that that would really rapidly speed up our ability to get those processed, but also get them into the system. Even if we don't have the results yet for the interpretations, we're going to be able to input those into the atlas to mark those off as having been completed. So those digital point count logs are just as important as the actual recordings to get submitted by the end of the month. We're currently in the middle of processing all those logs that have already been submitted by lots of people. Thank you very much to all of you who have submitted them already, and sort of using that as our quick cross-check to make sure there's no missing files or anything like that. So we're way ahead of where we were last year, and this way we won't have the delay that we've encountered this year.
Okay, thank you, Mike. I haven't seen any more questions come in. Oh, just kidding. One just kidding. So this one is from Judy. How long can the FY code be used for a fledged young? Use only when near parents, about 2 to 3 weeks, or first year in breeding season?
That's a great question. Yeah. So the basic kind of way you can go about thinking about it is, how confident are you that that bird was in fact hatched in that area? So if it's a bird that could be flying, 20, 30 kilometers easily, moving between multiple atlas squares, then that's probably not an appropriate use of that FY code. If it's dependent on its parents still, and it's, can make short flights, it might be flying like dozens of meters at a time, that's still okay. But yeah, once it's really capable of real big sustained flights and it's likely to be moving long distances, or if you have any doubt about that, then I would say don't use it. So definitely not for just young of the year. You don't want to be using it. But if it's a bird that's obviously a locally fledged bird and it's not capable of having traveled a long distance from its nest site, then you can use that FY code. I don't know, Kaylin, do you have anything to add to that one?
No, I think you covered it well. Yeah, just not capable of sustained flight is usually the way to go.
Okay, thank you. All right, we have another question here. I've submitted my data, but some species aren't showing up in the square summary sheet. What do I do?
You want to take that one, Kaylin?
Doesn't matter, either one.
You go for
Yeah.
it.
So there's a couple of reasons why your submitted data might not be showing up in the square summary sheet. So the first is that if it's a significant species, so provincially, regionally rare, or species of interest, anything that got flagged and you had to add more details for, those need to be reviewed by regional coordinators before they'll show up in your square summary sheet. So the first reason is that it might still be in that review queue. And the second reason might be if it's a species that you didn't add breeding evidence for. So say you saw an individual and you didn't add a breeding evidence code, that species won't show up in the square summary sheet because that sheet shows the highest breeding evidence per species per square. So if there's no breeding evidence, then that won't show up in the square summary sheet.
Okay, thank you. Give it another minute or so. We still have 10 minutes, so if you have any questions, or you're just thinking a little bit about questions, take your time. Again, you can use the Q&A function here in Zoom or on Facebook Live in the comments. Okay, if we, looks like the questions have kind of dried up, so we might call it there. If a question occurs to you later on, feel free to contact us either by email at atlas@birdsontario.org. We'd be happy to answer your question. There's also lots of information on our website. So our website is birdsontario.org, which we can put in the chat. And there's a lot of great resources on there if you want to look through the website that might answer your question. We also have a Discord server that you can join, and that's a great place to chat with other Atlasers or ask us some questions if you are stuck on something. And again, as we've mentioned earlier in this presentation, there's a lot of great videos on the our YouTube page. Lots of tutorials to walk you through how to enter your data. And this presentation as well will be uploaded there under the Sappy Hour YouTube channel there. So if you miss something or want to go back, then you can always review that as well. Mike, Kaylin, do you have anything else to add before we wrap up?
No, that's it. Thank you, Claire, for hosting. You've done a great job. We really appreciate all your help. And thanks so much, everyone, for coming out.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, thank you for the presentation, and hope this was helpful for those of you who are trying to get your data in for the next 3 days.
Great. Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.
All right,
Bye.
bye.